They called it the future of fraud detection. Internally, we just called it Sentinel. But I knew deep down that this system was more than a corporate buzzword. It was my brainchild, the product of hundreds of late nights, untouched dinners, and endless loops of testing and retraining. I had written the first lines of code for it during the pandemic, sitting on my tiny apartment floor, drinking stale coffee and dreaming of building something that could actually matter. And somehow, I did. My name is Maya, and until a few months ago, I was a senior data analyst at Silverline Insurance, one of the largest and most outdated insurance firms in the Midwest. I was one of the few women and the only Black woman in the company's core tech team. That meant I had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. But I didn't care. I didn't come there to be liked. I came to build. Sentinel started as a side project, a tool I created to flag suspicious claims based on pattern analysis and cross-validation against historical payout behavior. It caught things humans couldn't. Within 3 months of internal testing, it had already prevented over $2 million in fraudulent payouts. My manager praised me behind closed doors, but said the credit would go to the team. I didn't argue. I was used to playing the long game. Then came Thomas Kane. The board called it a bold move, hiring an outside CEO from Silicon Valley with a reputation for aggressive modernization. What they really meant was that he fired fast, cut deeper, and didn't give a damn about who got caught in the crossfire. He walked into the office like he owned the place, wore a different designer suit every day, and smiled like a man who never heard the word no. During his first all-hands meeting, Thomas told us, "We're building a future where efficiency trumps tradition, and loyalty means late nights." Everyone clapped. I didn't. That was the first time he looked at me. He started restructuring immediately. Middle management was gutted. HR was replaced with a new team loyal only to him. And tech? He wanted full control. One morning, I was asked to move all my work, including Sentinel's codebase, onto the company's internal servers. For security, they said, but I knew better. That wasn't about security, it was about ownership. I had used my personal laptop to build Sentinel. I had documented every iteration, every training log, every algorithmic pivot. Most of it I wrote on weekends, off the clock. It was mine. But now they wanted it to become Silverline property. They wanted me to hand it over, without recognition, without compensation. When I raised concerns to my manager, he told me, "Don't make this a big deal, Maya. This is how things work in big companies." I stared at him, wondering how long he'd been telling himself that to sleep at night. Still, I didn't argue. I played along, smiled in meetings, nodded when asked about timelines. But I never uploaded the full code. Just fragments, just enough to keep them distracted. At night, I backed up everything. I logged timestamps. I added encryption. I renamed functions so no one could trace them back easily. Because I knew. I knew the storm was coming. I just didn't know how fast it would hit. Thomas didn't waste time. Within a week of his arrival, he sent out a survey titled Team Alignment and Productivity Metrics. It looked innocent enough, but anyone with half a brain could see what it really was. A loyalty test. Questions like, would you be willing to work outside business hours to ensure project success? Or, how committed are you to Silverline's long-term vision, even when it requires personal sacrifice? Were a dead giveaway. I clicked prefer not to answer on everyone. That's when the invitations started disappearing from my calendar. Meetings I was supposed to be part of suddenly moved without notice. Files I needed access to were locked. A few junior devs stopped talking to me altogether. One even avoided eye contact in the elevator. I wasn't paranoid, I was being isolated strategically, and it wasn't subtle. Then came the collaboration request. A forced assignment, really. I was told I'd be working with a newly formed AI transition task force, comprised mostly of people who didn't understand the difference between a neural net and a spreadsheet. My job? Migrate Sentinel into the company's proprietary infrastructure, ensuring full compatibility and compliance. And I asked for clarification on what that meant. The email I got back was one line. All code must be centralized and standardized under company protocols. No exceptions. I knew what they were doing. They were trying to absorb it, strip away my fingerprints, turn my creation into something faceless and corporate. But worse, they wanted to erase the fact that it was ever mine to begin with. I pushed back. I requested a legal review of the transfer process. HR responded with a polite but firm message. Ownership of intellectual property developed during tenure at Silverline is governed by the employee agreement. I'd read that agreement a dozen times. Sentinel didn't qualify. I'd built its foundation on my own time, on my own machine, with no prior directive or funding from the company. It was mine. Still, they kept pressuring. A week later, I was called into a meeting with Thomas himself. He was seated in the center of a glass-walled conference room, flanked by two executives I'd never seen before. "Maya," he said, not even standing, "this is a pivotal moment for Silverline. You're a talented developer. We want you on board as we take Sentinel to the next level." I nodded cautiously. "I'm happy to help as long as my contributions are fairly recognized and legally protected." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, we're all on the same team here. But let me be blunt, if you're not aligned with the mission, there's no place for solo players in this company." I felt the trap closing. That wasn't a negotiation. That was a warning. 2 days later, during a Friday afternoon stand-up, Thomas publicly accused me of being resistant to integration. He said that certain individuals were putting personal ego ahead of company progress. Everyone knew who he meant. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him. That evening, HR called me in. A woman I'd never met handed me a thick envelope. "Effective immediately," she said. "Termination due to failure to comply with corporate directives." She didn't even look up. I left the office in silence. No one said goodbye. No one made eye contact. Just like that, I was out. Years of loyalty, results, and innovation wiped away because I refused to give away my work for free. I walked home under the pale glow of streetlights, clutching the envelope with both hands. I wasn't sad, not really. I was angry, and under that anger was something stronger, determination. If they thought they could steal from me and bury me quietly, they had no idea what I was capable of. The next morning, the reality hit me like a cold slap to the face. I didn't have a job. I didn't have severance. I didn't even have a reference letter. Just a generic termination notice and a signed NDA I had refused to complete. I stared at the envelope, still on my kitchen table, and felt my chest tighten. This was how they wanted to end it, quick, quiet, clean. Like I'd never been there, like I hadn't spent 3 years building something from nothing. I opened my laptop and saw the first sign of what was to come. My company email was already deactivated. I tried logging into the internal server. Access denied. I checked LinkedIn. I was still listed as an employee at Silverline. But within hours, that would change. I removed the job title myself. I didn't want my name attached to them anymore. An hour later, I got a call from a blocked number. I didn't pick up. The voicemail was from HR, reminding me to return my badge, my work laptop, and any company-owned materials. They didn't mention Sentinel, not directly, but I knew what they were really after. In the fine print of the letter they'd handed me the day before, they included a clause. All tools, frameworks, and associated IP developed during the course of employment at Silverline must be surrendered immediately. I read that line again and again, bile rising in my throat. They were trying to claim Sentinel as theirs. They wanted my code, my vision, my work, and they wanted it without paying a cent, without even acknowledging that I had created it. I felt dizzy. Betrayal pulsed through every inch of me. I opened my drive and stared at the folders I had protected, encrypted, backed up, Sentinel V1, Sentinel logs, Sentinel notes, all mine. I knew I had every right to it. I had started building it long before Silverline even greenlit the idea. I had the timestamps, the commits, the Git history. But suddenly, I wasn't sure that was enough. I called Lisa, an old friend from college who'd gone into IP law. I forwarded the letter, the emails, my employment contract. She called me back within 20 minutes. "Do not sign anything," she said firmly. Not a single word. They're bluffing. If they push it, we'll fight back. I breathed out for the first time in hours. Her confidence gave me the anchor I needed, but even so, I couldn't shake the chill under my skin. I knew how companies like Silverline worked. They had money, lawyers, and connections. They could bury people like me in legal mess until we gave up. That night, I lay awake for hours in my tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling. Rage simmered just beneath the surface. I thought about how Thomas had smirked when he called me a solo player, how no one, not even the people I mentored, had spoken up when I was fired. I had given so much, and in the end, they treated me like I was disposable. But then another thought crept in. If I'm really disposable, why are they still trying to take what I built? That's when the plan started forming. The next day, I shut down all my social media, locked down my online presence. I deleted the company from my LinkedIn profile, changed my location, and set everything to private. I didn't want anyone knowing where I was or what I was doing. I wasn't going to sit around and hope they forgot about me. I was going to vanish. And then I would rebuild. I used my savings to register a new LLC, Halcyon Analytics. Just a name, just a shell for now. But it was mine. I rented a tiny desk at a co-working space a few blocks from my apartment. The space was quiet, nothing fancy, but it had fast Wi-Fi and good coffee. I brought in my personal laptop, connected my hard drive, and opened Sentinel. Only it wouldn't be Sentinel anymore. I started from scratch. A new name, a new vision, a new architecture that would make the old one look like a prototype. I called it Vesper, short for Verification System for Pattern Recognition. But it was more than just a name. It was my answer to every insult, every stolen credit, every time someone had said I was just support.
Minds.
Every line of code I wrote was a declaration, a refusal to be erased. I documented everything meticulously, dates, times, process notes, even voice memos to track my logic. Lisa helped me file a provisional patent application within the week. I cut expenses, let go of everything unnecessary. No fancy dinners, no streaming subscriptions, no distractions. Just code and coffee and the quiet hum of focus. The loneliness was brutal. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the way Thomas had looked at me in that conference room, as if I had no power. I reminded myself of the silence from my colleagues when I was humiliated. That silence fueled me. Weeks passed. No contact, no emails, no calls. It was like I had been erased from their world. But I wasn't disappearing. I was just getting ready, because they thought I'd walk away, but I wasn't walking. I was building. And when I returned, they wouldn't see me coming. 3 weeks into rebuilding Vesper, the silence broke. It started with a vague message from an unknown number. The demo failed. They're scrambling. No name, no context. But I didn't need one. I knew exactly who they were. I imagined Thomas pacing inside Silverline's pristine conference room, demanding answers while the system they tried to steal from me refused to cooperate. Of course it failed. The version I left behind was incomplete, intentionally. It was never meant to function without the missing layers I held back. Layers only I understood. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the snow fall through the narrow window of the co-working space I now called my office. I didn't respond to the message. I didn't need to. The cracks were starting to show. A few days later, a polite email arrived in my inbox from Thomas. No subject line, just, "Hope you're doing well, let's talk." I read it once, then again before clicking delete. No reply, no reaction. I wasn't interested in vague pleasantries or performative apologies. He had made his position clear the day he fired me in front of a room full of people. Now he wanted to pretend we were on equal footing? No thanks. Instead, I focused on tightening Vesper's infrastructure. I refined the fraud detection models, optimized the response times, and layered in a transparency protocol, something Sentinel had lacked. I didn't want just a better version of the old system. I wanted something unignorable, something bulletproof. Then came the legal shot. An official-looking envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was a cease and desist letter, Except this time, it wasn't from me. It was from Silverline's legal department, accusing me of IP theft, breach of contract, and misuse of proprietary data. I laughed out loud. It was bold, desperate, and completely expected, but I was ready. Lisa, my attorney, was livid. They're bluffing, but they're hoping the lawsuit will scare you into handing it all over. Instead, we filed our own cease and desist, this time with a full dossier of evidence. Emails, code logs, Git histories, time-stamped notes, even the original Slack messages where I outlined the early framework months before Silverline ever approved the project, but I wasn't done. But Lisa helped me draft a second document, an open legal memo clarifying the timeline of development and the distinction between company property and personal innovation. We sent copies to Silverline's board of directors. No press yet, no drama, just pressure. Quiet, calculated pressure. And it worked. Rumors started leaking almost immediately. A friend still inside the company sent me screenshots from internal chats. Why is the demo delayed again? Thomas said it's a minor glitch. But didn't Maya build that whole thing? Doubt was spreading. Employees were questioning the narrative. Investors were asking for updates. The timeline wasn't adding up, and Thomas was running out of excuses. And then, late one night, another email arrived, this time from a different domain. A venture-backed insurtech startup, smaller but fast-growing, had heard whispers about what I was building. They wanted to see Vesper, not just the pitch, a real demo. I hesitated for a moment, then agreed to a video call. That weekend, I walked them through the core engine, masking just enough of the architecture to protect my IP. They were impressed, more than impressed. They asked how soon I could deliver a working version, what kind of support I'd need, and what it would take to bring Vesper to market. For the first time in weeks, I felt something unfamiliar, momentum. Silverline might have fired me, they might have tried to erase me, but they had forgotten one critical truth. I didn't need their platform. I was building my own. By the end of that week, the buzz around Vesper had started to ripple through the industry. The startup I demoed for, Atlas Risk Systems, moved quickly. They drafted a preliminary agreement offering seed funding, technical support, and full autonomy over development. They didn't want to own Vesper. They wanted to partner. It was everything Silverline refused to do. I signed the contract the next morning, hands trembling slightly as I typed my name. Just like that, Vesper had a future, and I had a team. I didn't make any announcements. I didn't post on LinkedIn or send out emails. I had learned the value of silence. But not everyone stayed quiet. Carla reached out, a text, short and out of nowhere. You need to see something. Attached was a file, a voice memo recorded during a closed-door meeting at Silverline. I hesitated before pressing play. Thomas's voice came through, clear and smug. She won't do anything. She's just a developer. No one's going to believe she built the whole system. We'll slap a new logo on it, change a few modules, and call it proprietary. Laughter followed, then another voice. What about the investors? Thomas again. We'll fake the demo if we have to. Smoke and mirrors. I sat frozen, the words echoing in my chest. It wasn't just arrogance, it was fraud, deliberate, calculated fraud, and now I had proof. Lisa and I reviewed everything. Audio files, email threads Carla forwarded later, screenshots of internal memos. They were planning to deceive stakeholders using pieces of my code, still poorly reverse-engineered from the skeleton I left behind. Lisa's eyes narrowed. They're not just stealing now. They're lying to investors. If this goes public, they're done. But I didn't go to the press. Not yet. Instead, I wrote a medium-length expose titled The Work They Tried to Erase. I didn't mention names, not directly, but I walked readers through the story, how I built a system to stop fraud, only to be targeted by it from within. I included timelines, anonymized quotes, and reflections on what it feels like to watch your own creation be claimed by someone else. I kept it professional, personal, and undeniable. Within hours, the article spread like wildfire. Tech bloggers reposted it. Industry veterans commented with support. Female engineers messaged me saying they saw themselves in my story. People asked questions, hard questions. Why would a company fire their lead developer days before a major rollout? Where is the original system now? Who actually built it? Silverline couldn't control the narrative anymore. The next day, someone leaked the memo Thomas had drafted to Silverline's board. A plan to shift blame to the legacy dev team, downplay Vesper's significance, and claim the new internal tool was independently built. But the timestamps didn't lie, and neither did the signatures on early architecture documents, with my name in black ink. A well-known tech journalist reached out to me for comment. I gave her everything on the record. 2 days later, the article dropped, From Silence to Spotlight, How One Developer Exposed a Corporate Cover-Up. The fallout was immediate. Investors started pulling back. Partners canceled meetings. Silverline's board announced an internal review. And Thomas? He went dark. No statements, no denials, just silence. Meanwhile, Atlas pushed forward. They brought on 2 machine learning engineers to work under my direction. We rented a small office in downtown Chicago. Nothing fancy, just 4 desks, a whiteboard, and a fridge full of energy drinks. But it was mine. It was real. And as we ran our first integrated test on Vesper's fraud engine and saw the results come back clean and accurate, I realized something. They thought they could bury me in silence. But I had found my voice, and now the whole world was listening. The wave of consequences that hit Silverline was swift and brutal. Within a week of the expose going live, 3 major investors publicly withdrew their support. Their statements were curt, citing ethical concerns and misalignment of values. Industry forums lit up with speculation, and Silverline's stock dipped for the first time in over a year. For a company built on stability and reputation, the damage wasn't just financial, it was existential. Inside sources started leaking more. I received anonymous tips, screenshots of emails, Slack messages, meeting transcripts. One in particular stood out. It was from a board member demanding clarity. Why did we let go of the architect of the system we're now claiming as ours? Another email from legal warned Thomas that continuing with the demo could be considered investor fraud. The pressure was building. Then came the tipping point. Silverline held a scheduled shareholder briefing meant to calm the storm, but instead of presenting a stable rollout plan, Thomas was grilled for nearly an hour. A transcript of the meeting made its way to me. He had no real answers, no functioning demo, no proof that Vesper, or any part of the AI framework, was developed internally. He fumbled, blamed the dev team, blamed shifting deadlines, even hinted that certain employees had sabotaged the project before leaving. But the board wasn't buying it. That same evening, a headline spread like wildfire across every major business site. Silverline CEO ousted amid AI scandal. Thomas Kane was officially removed as CEO, effective immediately. The company called it a strategic redirection. But everyone knew what it really was, a final act of damage control. They had backed the wrong man, and now they were paying the price. The next morning, my inbox was flooded. Recruiters, journalists, old colleagues. Some congratulating me, some apologizing, and some, like Jordan, the junior dev who had once avoided eye contact when I was fired, finally reaching out. His message was short. I froze. I'm sorry. If there's anything I can do now, please let me. I stared at his words for a long time. There was a part of me that wanted to ignore it. He hadn't stood up when I needed him most. But another part of me, the one building something bigger than revenge, felt the weight of that silence lift, just a little. I didn't reply, not yet, but I didn't delete the message either. At Atlas, everything was moving fast. Vesper was now in beta testing with 3 pilot clients. The results were promising: accurate fraud detection, reduced manual review times, and glowing early feedback. We filed for a full patent, locking in legal protection across key markets. Lisa handled everything with precision, building a fortress around the code that once nearly cost me everything. And still, Silverline tried to regain control. One morning I received a formal letter from their new interim CEO. It was dressed in polite language, full of compliments and looking forward to reconciliation. They offered me a settlement, a generous one. High six figures plus a full retraction of their claims if I agreed to sign an NDA and walk away from the public narrative. I smiled as I read it. It wasn't an apology, it was a bribe. I forwarded the letter to Lisa, then to the same journalist who had covered the story before. The next article went viral instantly. Fired developer offered hush money after corporate scandal. The public response was overwhelming. I wasn't just the underdog anymore, I had become a symbol. Proof that integrity, resilience, and quiet defiance could win. And as I stood in our office that night, watching my team troubleshoot the latest build of Vesper, I realized I hadn't just survived Silverline, I had outgrown them. A month later, we closed our first international licensing deal. Vesper would soon be deployed across 3 major insurance networks in Europe. The contract was worth more than my entire yearly salary at Silverline, times 10. But beyond the money, it was validation. Not just of the technology, but of every sleepless night, every moment I doubted myself, every time I thought maybe they'd succeeded in breaking me. They hadn't. I had taken everything they tried to use against me and built something stronger with it. We moved into a new space, bright, open, filled with whiteboards and natural light. Our team had grown too, each person hired not because of their pedigree, but because they believed in what we were building. Jordan joined eventually, after weeks of honest conversations and accountability. He came in humble, eager to learn, and more importantly, ready to do better. I gave him a chance, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because I believed in redemption. The tension faded with time. What replaced it was something better. Trust born from shared purpose, not fear. Then, the final email came, from Thomas. No letterhead this time, no legal tone, just a message filled with regret. He blamed pressure, the board, timing, his own ego, said I was the most talented person he'd ever worked with, said he hoped one day I'd understand. I didn't reply. Some stories don't need a final chapter. I archived the email and moved on. Last week, I gave a keynote at a global AI summit in Toronto. I walked out onto the stage to a packed auditorium and flashing cameras. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I told the story, not of revenge, but of resilience, of how a refusal to work unpaid overtime led me to build something entirely mine. I spoke of betrayal, of silence, of the power of standing your ground when everything else is pushing you down. And that's the message I carry forward. You don't have to scream to be powerful. You don't have to burn bridges to win, but you must protect what you build, keep the receipts, own your work, and never let someone convince you that your value depends on staying quiet. Because sometimes the loudest message you'll ever send is simply surviving and thriving without them.